Hello and welcome to part 6 of my presentation, AngularJS and SharePoint. In this video, we will continue to explore the components that make up this application. As you see from our PowerPoint slide, we are now going to look at List.html and Cigars.List.js. These files are used to display the items in the list and to search the items in the list and then select individual items for the next components. Here we have list.html, which is the web page that displays all of the list items as well as the search capabilities. It's basically a table, and in the first row we have our search text box. It has two event handlers, ng-change, which calls text search change, and ng-keypress, which calls text search change, passing in the event, but only when the key code is 13. What that means is when you type in any character but enter, it's going to call the text search change event. If you press the enter key, it's going to call the text search change event, which is going to throw away the event. Because if you click the enter key in SharePoint, it'll automatically submit the form, which means it's going to put the site page in edit mode. This was very confusing, and I finally figured out a way around it. So basically, we have two different events to capture the enter key and throw it away. So out of habit, when you're typing, I tend to hit the search. I type in the search and I tend to hit the enter key, and that screws up the page, and we've managed to overcome that. Now, you'll notice that the VM search is the value of our text. So that means that whatever you enter in text search is being stored in the variable vm.search. We'll see that later in our code. Then we have the view, which uses CBO views, which displays all of the views in our views collection. We have a new button, which calls command new click. And then we have the actual list. Very quickly, if the item's length is greater than 0 and there's no warning, then we're going to show a loading H2 tag. If we have at least one item in the items collection, it's going to draw the rest of this table. So we're going to go through all of the view fields array and show the title of each view field, and that's going to be the first row, so that's our column headers. Then we're going to loop through all of the items in VM items, and it's going to draw a link right here, which is tied to the title field, and then it's going to loop through all of the remaining fields in the view, and it's going to draw them. This code here is saying if it's calculated or a note, we're going to handle the style a certain way and pass in the actual HTML values, not the raw HTML. If it's a multi, then we're wrapping it a certain way. Otherwise, it's just going to show the value. So this ng repeat goes through each item in the list, and this ng repeat goes through each field in each item, and that is how we draw our items. Here we have the list controller in the Cigars.List.js file. As you see, we're calling our Angular module mod cigars. We're defining a new controller named list, and you can see we're passing in several directives, both with the double quotes and then without the double quotes inside the function as arguments. These directives allow us to use these external namespaces within our application. We then have to define VM as equal to this, meaning this controller. There are several places within our application where we're defining VM as the current controller. This is one of them. Now we're going to jump to the end of our code. So here we have main. This happens after the methods and after the events. All of that is going to get skipped by our code. It's just going to fall through all of them because they're all functions. It's not going to run them until they're called. And this code right here is what gets processed. Now, you're used to thinking of some applications where you actually define a main or a form load or some other method within a class that kicks it off. In JavaScript, unless you're calling a function, the code is just going to skip all of that and go to the first piece of code it can run by itself. So all of this right here, I'm just labeling it main, but this is going to run when you first load the page, and after that, everything above that we're going to go look at in a minute is going to be a function or an event that gets called. The reason I'm putting this code at the end is for JavaScript, if I haven't defined a method, it throws an error when I try and call the method. So we're defining our view variable, which is the current view, and we're going to set the title of that view equal to blank. And we're setting the list URL, which is basically it's the SharePoint list. This is a REST command that's going to go get the list that's named cigars. So VM list URL is going to be used within our HTTP calls to use that specific SharePoint list. Now, route parameters are defined within the URL. So if you entered a search string, when you drill into the list controller and go down into an item and then it calls back to the list controller again, I'm passing in that search so you don't have to enter it again. So if you've already searched, say you type in Macanudo to only see Macanudo cigars, no matter where you go to, I'm going to keep reloading that search string for you so you don't have to type it in again. This is another way outside of the factory where you can pass variables back and forth between controllers, is using the route parameters. So if route parameters search means search is not null, and search is not undefined, which is sort of the fall through. If search has not been defined, it's gonna list it as undefined. That's essentially the same as null. Well, it's not null, but it is. If it thinks there's a search but there's no actual characters there, it's going to be undefined. So if we have a search parameter, we're setting the VM search variable equal to route param search. As you recall, the text search text box has the value of VM search. So that's how we're able to take the search from the fragment identifier and put it right back in the text search. And then I'm going to call show results. Show results is going to use VM search, and it's going to filter the list. Now, if this was false, we're just going to go ahead and call show results anyway. What happens if you call show results? Well, it's going to load every cigar in the list, and that's the result we want. We're going to move up here a little bit to events. Text search change, as you recall, is the event that gets called when either you hit enter or you type in any other key. So if you hit enter, we're passing in an event value. So if event value is not null, we call the prevent default. Now, we don't need to check to make sure that event is the enter key, because the only place that can call the enter key is text search change when event is not null. So in the HTML, we basically built the if statement that says only call text search change if it's the enter key, otherwise throw it away, because we can't use the key press to process. We have to use the key down process, the ng key down. So basically, if event is not null, we know event is the enter key. Throw the prevent default method to tell the event not to do what it's supposed to do, and return. So basically, this code, in short, this code fires if you hit the enter key, and it does absolutely nothing. In every other circumstance, we call show results, and show results is going to populate our list. Finally, we got the command new click event. If I click command new, it's going to change the location of our window to new item. And as we explained earlier, the fragment identifier, this pound and the words after it, is like a query string. It fires off internal to the client. It doesn't make a callback to the server, and it allows Angular to redraw a portion of the parent web page without reloading the entire page. So this is how we travel back and forth between the different controllers in our application. We change window location href, and we set a new fragment identifier, and you're going to see other examples of that when we get into the item controller, where we set it to edit, we set it to display, or we set it to blank plus the search, which then sends us back to the list again. So this is how you move back and forth within your controllers. Okay, now we're going to back out and jump to the top, and we're going to look at our methods. Okay, so we have getView. GetView is called to determine what the current view is from the view title that's passed in. If views has already been populated, we're calling our QWhen statement. Again, this returns a promise. And so we're saying, if you've already populated the views, we don't need to do it a second time, so you come back. So if we move past that, we know that views is blank, so we're defining views as an array. Remember, square brackets are an array. And we're defining view fields as an array. Here we're calling an HTTP method get, which this basically is going to get the views for the list URL. This is going to get all of the views, and we're going to pass through them. And as I mentioned before, this is JSON, so we're getting a nice, easy to read response.data.d.results. That is the results component of the entire JSON that we received from our HTTP call. We're going to do the Angular for each to loop through all of these results. The individual iterations are called result. So if result title is not blank, we're going to add the view to VM views. There are views that Angular creates that do not have a title. We don't want to show those, so we're not even going to load them. Then if the title equals view title, then that's our current view. So if up here we passed in, because the user hit the drop down and picked a different view, we're passing in a different view title. If that's a match, then the current view is now VM view. Otherwise, if the result is default view, then we're going to set VM view equal to that result. So what that does is we're populating VM view from the either what the user chose, or we go to the default view if the user didn't choose. So now we've defined our view. We're going to take our VM views array, which is all of the views, and these are not titles, by the way. These are the actual objects. I'm populating the actual view object, which means all of the properties of the view is stored in this array. So what this method does, this command does, is it's ordering the VM views by title. So it puts them in order by alphabetically by title. Now we're going to loop through all of the view fields, and if it's not one of these types, like link menu and user selection and so on, it's going to add each of these views to view field. So view fields is going to be all of the fields in the current view. We are taking all of the fields in the current view and adding them to view fields. But if it's title or edit or one of several other types of fields, we're going to throw those out and not use them. Which means when we draw our list, we're only going to show we're only going to show fields from the view that are useful. We're not, if the user made a view that had, there are several ways to show the title. One is an edit, one is a link through, one is just the text for the title. We're throwing all those away. We're putting the title in the front and making it a link to the item. And basically, this only gives us user-friendly fields from the view to show in our list. All right. Now here, this is where we're interrogating each of the view fields and see if they're a Boolean or calculated or date time, and we're setting those properties. That's going to be useful in our ng repeat in Cigars.html, where we are going to draw the output of each field depending on what we've found. So in other words, if it's date time, it's going to treat it as a date time. If it's a multi-lookup, it's going to draw it as a user-friendly output and not just a bunch of semicolons and other things that are hard to read. So basically, that's all we're doing, is we're prepping each of the view fields so that the data is drawn the correct way. All right. If there's an error, we're going to catch it, and we're going to call show error and pass in the response. And the show error is going to draw a nice red header on the page telling the user what went wrong, and it's going to write to the console. So you can open up the console in your browser and see more detailed error results. Okay, moving on, we have get results. Get results is called from show results, which we'll get to in a few minutes. Get results receives a URL. This is where we're actually getting the data from our SharePoint list. So we're going to loop through the results, and for each result, we're going to populate an item object. So we're setting ID to ID, title to title, and then a fields array. So for each view field, remember we populated the view fields earlier. For each view field, we're going to get the value, and depending on whether it's calculated or it's a date time and so on, that's going to control how we're drawing it. So you saw in the previous code, we're setting the property of the field to date time. So when we run into an item that has a date time, we're actually turning it into a user-friendly format. So this works with the code in the previous step to make sure that we're not just spitting back the results. We're taking the results, we're cleaning it up, and when we're done, we're taking the field value and we're pushing it to the item fields collection. So basically, what all that does is it takes each result, it cleans it up, it saves it to an item, and then I'm pushing the item to the items collection. And then we're done, we're going to be returning the items collection. Okay? Show error, as I mentioned, interrogates what the response is, and depending on what it is, it's going to draw the warning in several different ways. It's going to find the user-friendly portion of the error message and show that to the user, and it's going to take the entire error and spit it out to the console. So the user sees something that says to the effect of that field doesn't exist or that list doesn't exist, but the console will show all of the data so we can go in and see what went wrong. So that's show error. Show results is called whenever you first load the application, or when you change the search, or when you change the view. Any of those will fire off the same show results method. So we're setting items to an empty array. We're clearing out the warning, and then we're calling get fields, passing in the URL. Remember, get fields was defined in our Cigars.js file in the factory, and we're going to go through the fields. We're assigning them to VM fields, and then we're going to populate view fields with all the fields in the view, and then we're going to create a URL. So basically what this is doing is it's building a very long URL that's going to tell the HTTP call to REST, this is the data we want to get back from the list. So I'm kind of skimming over this. We create an order by portion for the REST URL by using the view query. As I said, every view is preserved. I'm not just preserving the title, I'm preserving all the properties of the view. So I'm taking the view query, which decides how things are filtered and how things are sorted, and we're adding that to our URL. All right, so we've gone through all of that. We create our URL. We add in the expand. In my next video series where I talk about the REST API, I'm going to explain in detail how all of this magic works with REST, but I'm simplifying it just to keep this video series relatively short. Okay, so here we're doing VM search. If there is any search and the length is greater than 1, meaning you typed in at least 2 characters, I'm getting the results of the URL, and then I'm going to loop through all of them, and I'm building a full text string. In order for me to search note fields, which are multi-line text fields, the REST API can search almost every field. So in the call to REST, I can build the search criteria into the call, but I'm not doing that because it doesn't help for multi-line text fields. So what I'm doing is I'm loading all of the data from the SharePoint list, and then I'm using this code here to search each row to see if VM search exists inside of full text. So full text, I'm basically building a very long string of all of the fields in that item that are in the view. In other words, if you have a view that has 5 fields, I'm searching those 5 fields, and that's all. So it's important when you're building your views, if you want to search certain fields, you have to include them in the view, otherwise the search is going to ignore them. But what this allows me to do is this allows me to search multi-line text. So I'm basically pulling in all the data and doing a manual search for my criteria inside a long string that represents all of the fields in that item. So if we have a match, we push the result to VM items. When we're done, if the length is 0, we're sending a warning. Okay, now let's assume there are no searches. I'm only going to get the top 200 results from SharePoint, and I'm just going to draw them. And again, if the list was somehow empty, I have no results found. Okay, and then there's our catch. So that is, in a nutshell, how the list controller works and how we search for items in the list. All right, we managed to get through 2 more components in our application. That video went rather long. We're going to go and take a break here, and in the next part we'll finish up with the remaining display and edit HTML files and Cigars.items.js, which deals with the individual items in the application. See you soon.